All right. I do believe we're live. How you guys doing today?
Doing all right.
Good. So where do you start on a day like this?
Yeah, I was like, all right is a relative term, I should say.
It's another week and Earth is still here. I'm not sure beyond that really what we can claim.
Okay. All right.
After the last week. So, yeah.
Well, you sort of start to have a certain amount of sympathy for Nero. You know, Nero fiddled while Rome burned.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell else was he supposed to do? You know, okay, so we've got a pandemic. We've got riots. We've got political meltdown overall. We've got an economy that nobody has done anything about in a sensible way. Kind of for the first time ever, the rest of the world is saying, no, we don't want people from the United States to travel here.
And are pitying us for the first time, probably in American history.
All right. So where do we take it from here?
Up, hopefully.
You really think? I mean, we've clearly, you know, we've gone over the top and we're in the free fall phase on the roller coaster. All right. How much further do we free fall before hopefully we get to a point where we do the upturn?
It's anybody's guess at this point.
The rest of this year is probably going to be a free fall.
Yeah.
And if we get a vaccine and if we get some kind of more effective leadership, maybe we'll have a better year next year.
It's hard to imagine that we will have less effective leadership. Well, one hopes.
This is going to be one of the lost years, I think, 2020, of American history.
Lost. Explain.
Well, the possibilities of what might have happened positively in large part have been squandered. And obviously, you know, we didn't, you know, do anything to create a pandemic that spread throughout the world, but we didn't react very well to it. And we didn't react very well or manage things very well that have led to social unrest now. And some young friends of mine, I'm an older guy now, but some young friends of mine sometimes have asked about, what about that incredible, there was never a year like 1968 in American history, the Vietnam War going and the Tet Offensive, sending that totally out of control in a surprising way. Lyndon Johnson having a crisis of confidence and a meltdown and withdrawing, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and pandemonium and mayhem and riots in the streets, the Democratic National Convention riots and so on. I mean, I'm not so sure that I need to describe, we're kind of reliving in part 1968 now suddenly again.
Well, I wonder if when it comes down to it, from 50 years in the future, when people look back and they put 1968 and 2020 on the scale, you know, I'm actually sort of increasingly imagining that 2020 would win that competition. I think is the direction that we headed, because whatever you thought of Johnson and Kennedy and people like that, they were infinitely more competent than what we have now. You know, when you think of loss of American lives, what's going on with COVID is wildly worse than the Vietnam War. For crying out loud.
It's 106,000 now, at least. Casualties in the United States now.
And climbing. There's some really fun stuff out looking the Imperial College London group. Their report number, is it 23? I don't remember for sure the report number. But one of their recent reports, they looked at what's going on in the United States on a state-by-state basis and went through and assessed on the basis of that what fraction of the population was still vulnerable. And the number that they came up looking at how the pandemic has played out in the United States is that still something like 96% of the people are susceptible to COVID. And the testing that has been done, in places like New York, I think maybe you're up to 15% have had it, or 17% or something like that. But the testing that's been done across the country, now that we're starting to do some testing, again says that, yeah, we're probably down around 5% of the population has had it, which means that something like 95% of the population can still get it, which means that nothing has happened except that 100 and some odd thousand people have died.
Well, wait a minute now. Are you telling me? I heard somebody say that you could go out and reopen stuff and go have picnics again and stuff. Allison, is that not right?
That's what I've heard, but it doesn't mean it's true. I think that's the problem, though, is that, like we were saying before the show, nothing, from a disease standpoint has changed. Nothing. And yet, things are opening up and people are going outside and going to stores and having picnics and parties and, whatever. And nothing has really changed. And we're going to notice that very soon, I think.
Yeah. I know here, I've been watching the last numbers, and in Arizona, the last few days, the numbers have, far and away the highest numbers of new cases reported, which is not surprising. In fact, we talked about it, over Memorial Day weekend, coming out of that weekend. We said, yeah, give it about 2 weeks and we're going to start seeing things go up. And sure enough, we're seeing things going up, and they're going up fast. So yeah. On the other hand, there was something fun this weekend. The best description of it I saw is somebody posted, 2 astronauts left the Earth. They made a good choice.
It's exciting though. I mean, after 9 years, here we have American astronauts going into orbit. From Launch Pad 39A, where the missions took off back in the day, and it's been since the shuttle in 2011. This is a big moment for American space exploration and or non-reliance on Russia as well.
So what do you think about the fact that they're sitting on top of a SpaceX rocket and not a rocket that was produced as part of a NASA initiated, let's build this thing vehicle?
Allison, you want to go first? You want me to?
I guess I can. What I was just thinking. I mean, I think it's very reflective of the way priorities have skewed in this country recently. I mean, and it's really interesting. I mean, even just talking to my friends, like the division where people are either like super glad that it's, been privatized, and people that are very angry that it's been privatized. I think that's very interesting. I mean, it's kind of like a lot of other things right now. It's become very polarized. On the one hand, this is clearly the way that it's got to happen right now. On the other hand, I wish, that it could have been more of a, centralized, government effort. So it's a little bit of both. It's interesting. It's very indicative of our time, I think, in whatever way you want to choose to believe that.
I would agree. And I think that if there is a progression and we go back to the moon and we go to Mars, which is going to be frightfully expensive and extremely dangerous, more than the space, exploration fans want to think about, really, just in terms of radiation exposure and things like that over these time intervals, probably it's ultimately going to have to be, I think, a governmental, private, and multinational partnership to do something like that. So maybe this is kind of, throwing Elon a bone, but maybe this kind of thing is a good sort of first step into a much larger partnership to explore the solar system in the far future, especially if Congress ever wants to allocate money to science ever again.
Yeah, I mean, because the Apollo program itself is very political in a way.
Yeah.
And so
in a way,
and well, in a lot of ways.
it's sort of like saying the Pope is very Catholic in a way.
Well, so here's the thing though, is like someone like me who did not grow up during that time, right? To me, you know, just looking at the Apollo program, it wasn't political. It was this great triumph of the United States and mankind and all of this stuff, because I didn't live through it and I didn't see how very political it was until you delve deeper into it, you know, from a perspective of someone who didn't live through it.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of you know, younger people today think, is that it wasn't political. It was just this cool thing that we did, and why can't we do it again? And the reason is because it was a very politically fueled thing, and we don't have that same kind of fire underneath us right now. So I think that's why. And that's why things have changed.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I am more enthusiastic about the fact that it's not NASA than you guys are, for a number of reasons. A lot of that probably has to do with spending many, many years, you know, working very close to NASA and sort of seeing that world.
Right.
And NASA, certainly working with SpaceX is going to be good for NASA, because NASA had become very staid in its ways. That NASA has this mindset that, okay, everything has to be just absolutely just so, and we're gonna, one of the stories that you hear told that sort of captures that difference is, early on in their collaboration, there was some kind of a problem before test launch, and the NASA folk were there, and they went off, and then they came back in the next day, and we're talking about, okay, now we've figured out should be on who is going to be on these committees and to look at this problem, and so on and so forth. And the couple of guys from SpaceX were standing there in their jeans and t-shirts and said, well, actually, we fixed it last night.
No, that's I think, again, NASA is a government entity, and
it's
limited by that in a lot of respects.
So
sometimes, you know, not having to play by the rules is a good thing.
Because I know that, I'm sure you guys both saw the explosion of the Starship test.
Sure. Yeah.
That was really very spectacular, I will say.
It was. It's a little frightening.
Oh yeah, well, a little frightening, but it was. Had that been a NASA vehicle, then everybody would have been all over it. Oh, this NASA vehicle that we'll be taking, it blew up, and it would be everything.
Boondoggle. Yep.
Yeah.
And I remember, by the way, between the era of the X-15 flights and the start of the Mercury program, how many NASA and proto-NASA rockets exploded and misfired.
Yeah. Say that was pretty much just history repeating itself at that point.
Yep. All right. So we promised we were going to talk to people about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes.
Today. And it's well, we'll talk about why. Allison, what was the first time that you heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Probably about 2 months ago.
Really?
I was down a YouTube hole and found a TED Talk about it. I mean, I think I had probably heard of it before, but I had never remembered the name, or, you know.
Okay.
So I'm sure that I'd probably heard of it before, because as I was watching the TED video, I was like, I feel like I've read this before somewhere. But first time I can actually remember the name was probably about 2 months ago. But yeah, it was an interesting find on YouTube.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think it's something that anybody who has taught has seen. That, and for those who don't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, basically the Dunning-Kruger effect says that it takes a certain level of competence in a field before you can appreciate the degree of your competence.
And incompetence as well.
And incompetence as well. Yeah, that is, you have to know a fair bit to get to the point that you realize how little you know. which I always kind of thought was the purpose of a PhD.
Yeah, I think that's probably the context in which I heard it, and it was just never called that, is my guess.
Yeah, yeah. That I know it. I remember when I got my PhD, it's like, okay, I've been working at this for so long, and you're working on your PhD, and by golly, when I get this thing done, I'm gonna PhD. And then you actually defend the thing, and at least for me, it was really very anticlimactic. Because it was like, okay, I really don't feel any smarter now than I did 5 minutes ago. And I just spent the last N years of my life, digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into this one. I worked on supernova remnant shock waves and things like that for my PhD. And so here, I knew more about what was going on with the shock waves and Cygnus loop type supernova remnants than anybody on the planet. And this is one little bitty piece of knowledge. And then you look around and there's this whole terrain, and you realize, oh shit, that hole could be, pick anywhere out of that terrain and you could dig just as deep a hole. And so I think properly viewed, a PhD should be should teach you humility about that, understanding. You come to understand what actually being knowledgeable about something is.
Well, and I think that goes hand in hand with, having met and having someone who doesn't have a PhD, but I grew up around the school and my father did, and have met you guys do, and have met many hundreds of people who are professors of various types or non-academic PhDs. And almost all of them are very realistic and humble, really, in terms of what they know, their knowledge, and very forgiving and giving about the overall knowledge of others about various. The people who are the so-called know-it-alls tend to be people who don't know quite as much, which leads straight into Mr. Dunning and Mr. Kruger.
Yeah. Now, it's the story as I understand it, and I've not read read their papers in a while, but the story as I understand it, that had something to do with giving rise to the work was, oh God, what was the guy's name? MacArthur Wheeler was a bank robber. And
it's a classy name for a bank robber.
MacArthur Wheeler, yes, very classy name for a bank. He was not a very successful bank robber, as it turns out, however. And the reason he was not a very successful bank robber is because he had read somewhere about, well, lemon juice you could use as disappearing ink. So lemon juice was invisible ink, and he thought that meant that he could just take lemon juice and put it on his face, and that somehow that would make him invisible for the cameras. And much to his chagrin, those pictures turned out. So, he thought he was the invisible man, and it didn't quite turn out that way. But no, Dunning-Kruger effect has shown up in all sorts of, there's been a lot of research over the years that's shown it in all sorts of different contexts. And the idea being is that to recognize how much you do not know in a field, you actually do have to know a certain amount. And that there's a tendency for people to learn just a little bit and say, oh, all right, I've got this. They even... I have heard it referred that first peak in the Dunning-Kruger curve, where you've got people who really know very, very little about the subject, and by virtue of the fact that they don't understand any of the complexities, imagine that they've got the whole thing nailed, is Mount Stupid. So your first step is you wind up here on Mount Stupid. And then as you learn more, you come to appreciate, okay, maybe I don't know so much. And then you get to the point where you start to actually develop some expertise. And as you develop expertise, sometimes it depends on the context, but sometimes a person who has a lot of expertise, a true expert, can be less confident in their knowledge about an area than the person who, just read a couple of pieces on the internet and decide that they're now the experts.
Well, I think the who's just read a little bit doesn't know the fallacies or the pitfalls, and when you know enough, you start to think of a lot of your caveats to every single point. So
For example, earlier today I was doing a lot of reading about something you know a lot about, Jeff. You both do, I'm sure. The history of identifying the Crab Nebula with the supernova of 1054. So when you get into the details of how that was put together historically, the expansion rate of the Crab Nebula, thinking about the location in Taurus, thinking about the timing of 900 years ago when, it was, a number of astronomers, including Hubble and Slipher and Nicholas Mayall and other people worked on it at different times from the 20s and through the end of the 30s. But you realize not only you get into more of this and the number of details that are involved with learning about the object itself grow exponentially as you read more about it. And then they also change exponentially over time as the historiography of learning more about it. So you realize, my God, all the stuff you'd have to know about this just to understand how the identification, say, of coinciding the Crab Nebula supernova remnant with the supernova of 1054. But you never get into something even at that minute level of detail to understand the many, many dozens of interlocking pieces that would have to go together to understand something like that.
Yeah, and I actually saw a talk given one time, and I don't remember the details of the talk, but it was about, God, was it about R. Leary variables? It may have been. Anyway, guy was given this talk, and in the middle of the talk, he just stopped and just looked dumbfounded for a second. And then he pointed up on this one plot up there, and he said, I have spent my entire life putting those 3 data points on that line.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, that's in fact, although there's it's
he didn't go jump off the top of a 12-story building after he said that, did he?
No, we didn't. No,
there's a happy ending here, I hope.
He was still around when we took the speaker out for lunch after the talk. So we didn't. At least he managed to get back on the airplane and head back to wherever he was before he offed himself over that realization.
Jeez.
But no, that adds a real challenge, I think, to communicating science, because I think there are an awful lot of scientists who, because they do understand the complexity of it,
they're hesitant to be certain about things.
Yeah.
They're,
like you ask somebody right now about COVID.
Yeah.
If you ask an epidemiologist about COVID, what they're first going to tell you is, well, there are these uncertainties in how we measure these things and and so on and so forth. When what they really should be saying is, yeah, okay, we all agree that the vast majority of the population is susceptible to this. We all agree that in Wuhan-like circumstances, in New York City type circumstances, that the reproductive number in the wild is something like 2.4 or so. We all agree on basically what the mortality rates are. We all agree on what the predictions are. We all agree on what the basic effective interventions are and how they work. And so, yeah, we at the level that any of you guys out there even begin to understand this, we are all in perfect agreement. But instead, you get somebody that is, well, okay, here are the complexities. And then you get some, okay, what word to use? Somebody sitting there on the top of Mount Stupid, a business professor at some place like Washington University, or maybe even a business professor at Washington University.
Who shall remain nameless, but his or her.
Who shall remain nameless, but might be referred to as Anne Marie Knott. Yeah, exactly. You understand.
This is like the Monty Python, blackmail show, Who shall remain, nameless, although his real name is Bertrand Paul of 36 Sex Cross.
So where at this point should she be putting the money? I forget the description of where the ransom was. Yeah, or the blackmail.
He's a brave one, as the film continues.
Of course, you realize, Dave, that right now you and I are busting a gut over this, and that some fair. Do you know what we're talking about, Allison?
I do not.
We're showing that at least part of our youth was wasted watching public television.
Heart. If you can find a part of my youth that wasn't wasted, point it out to me, and I'll go back and try again.
On television, it's different television. That's all. So.
Oh, but yeah, somebody comes along, and this is the thing. In fact, I posted the fun that I had very end of last week and over the weekend was this woman who's a business professor decides that she really, really doesn't like COVID.
Mm.
And she's so sure that she doesn't like COVID that she's sure that COVID can't be a real thing. And she does something that we have all seen students do. And that is, when you give an exam, the worst thing you can do when you give an exam is tell students that they can bring in a formula sheet. Because if you let them bring in a formula sheet and then you present them with a problem that requires them to actually think, instead of thinking, what they're going to do is they're going to just start saying, well, here's a number for this, and I'm going to plug it into that formula. And here's a number for this, and I'm going to plug it into that formula. And here's a number here. And then, oh, look, I got a number out. And if I write down all of the numbers on my calculator, the answer is 1.7638294. And the question was, what's the distance to the center of the galaxy in kilometers or something? It's just craziness.
Big number. Yeah.
Big number. No. It says right here. I plugged into these formulae and it says right here. It's 1.7.
There's an X in the question. There's an X in this formula. So if I just.
That's right. There's an X in here. And what this one did, she clearly, she desperately wants COVID not to be a thing. We'd all like for COVID not to be a thing. She desperately wants COVID not to be a thing.
But we can't wish it away, though. We've acknowledged that.
Oh, can we not? Really?
But we can wish it away when we get a vaccine or herd immunity.
We don't get to wish it away? Who says we don't get to wish it away?
Science.
See, you're a buzzkill. You're a damn scientist. What do you mean? Science. That's why we don't like scientists. You scientists,
we're all pessimists and so.
Yeah, you just tell us we can't have our magic.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see when this thing comes rushing back, which it's beginning to do. Who's going to get blamed for it? I'm sure in the end it will be our fault.
No doubt. Yeah.
No doubt it will be.
Probably the United States, the state governors as well, probably.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what's going on now with, Trump wanting to, we're going to pull out of WHO, and we're going to, this was all China's fault and all of this kind of stuff. You step back and say, well, actually, we had a lot of warning before it got here.
Mm-hmm.
And we had epidemiologists all over the place standing up and saying, if we get ahead of this thing, it won't be so bad, but we really do have to get ahead of this thing. While the orange one is up there, so this is just the Democrats' latest hoax to make him look bad or whatever. The only good thing is that videos persist.
Mm.
You know, all of those, and we'll see a lot of them, I'm sure.
Well, tying that into Dunning-Kruger, how is it that someone who is partially educated, like myself, and went to some school and then hears that, well, you know, things are kind of opening up and the restrictions are lessening, and I don't really know anyone who's, you know, mortally wounded next to me. I'm going out to the bar tonight.
Mm-hmm.
That's the extent of the analysis of what's happening in many, 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 many people's minds in this country.
Yeah, we're go along to get along. That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
What about your? I mean, Allison, people you know, what are they doing in the face of this right
now? Nothing. Asking the question. The younger people that I know are taking it very seriously and not going out. The older people that I know have never, if they ever made concessions, they are now stopping, and some of them never did.
Is the difference just younger and older, or is it background?
In my family, yes.
Okay. All right.
In my admittedly very small family of 4. So,
okay. All right. All right.
And I mean, and again, looking among my friends, again, it seems to be largely the case where people my age are doing one thing and their parents are doing another.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I've kind of noticed that among people that I know that the more scientifically minded you are, the more likely you are to be continuing to distance and do all of those reasonable kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Because everybody else, if you don't understand it, and that's the thing with this talk from this person at Washington University, annoyed me so much. Again, it annoyed me enough that I sat down and put together a rebuttal video and sent it off and kind of chewed out her dean a little bit and some things like that. Yeah, she puts this thing out there. She knows absolutely nothing about the topic. Truly, absolutely nothing about the topic. And she looks at some data and plugs in here and comes to the conclusion that, oh, right out of the bat, that 80% of us were already immune. Okay.
How was that?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that the reproduction number of this thing in the wild was like 0.5. Now, for those who don't know the mathematics of it, what an epidemic does is an epidemic, God, how much of this to talk about? Exponential growth, all of that kind of stuff. There is, when you're talking about an epidemic, there's a number up in the exponent. And if that number is positive, then what happens as time goes by is the number of cases does this. And if that number is negative, then as time goes by, the number of cases does this. Okay. Her claim was that right out of the gate, COVID had a replication number of 0.5, which would have meant that the number in the exponent was minus 0.5. And if that were the case, then the numbers would have done that. You know, just right out of the gate. It just would have been, boom. Did I get that right? Minus 0.5? No, it's minus. Anyway, what is it? 0.5, 1 over 0.5, 2. No, minus. Yeah, okay. Anyway, that right out of the gate, what would have happened was that the numbers would have done this. And so she kept saying, oh, here's this place where the numbers did this, and then they just leveled off, and that was all just magical, and really that's because the replication number was only 0.5. And you look and you say, but wait a minute, that point where it levels off, they did interesting things there. Like they quarantined people, and they started isolating people from each other, and they started doing all of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
No. That didn't have anything to do with it, because you see, we were all anyway. But because she had this title and was associated with Washington University and all of this kind of stuff, 112,000 people watch it and say, oh, I guess that means that we don't have to worry about COVID anymore.
Mm.
And so, despite the fact that there have been at this point well over 100,000 people in the United States that have clearly died from COVID, we don't know how large that number actually is, but at least that many. Despite the fact that, as we were talking before, yeah, if something like 4%, which is the kind of number you're really looking at, of the nation has had the disease, assuming it conveys immunity, and if you have to get to something like 80% to have herd immunity, then what you're saying is, okay, getting from 0.4 to 80 is, that's a nice factor of 20. And so actually, no, it's a factor of 200. 0.4 to 80 is a factor of 4 to 80, excuse me, is a factor of 20.
Is a factor of
20. I
20.
am incapable of doing elementary math today. Anyway, a factor of 20. We're looking at something like 100,000 who are dead. Multiply that by 20, and you're talking about the possibility of 2 million people. And you just are. And it's not difficult to understand that. But here you've got somebody who is wrapping herself in the sigil of Washington University and standing up and telling people that, no, you can't get COVID. And this whole thing was just a hoax, that all of the epidemiologists and all of those folk were just completely wrong, and that really we should all just now ignore it and go back to life as usual. People are going to die because of that video.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that?
It's really tough. I mean, it's like, some of what's going on, now societally here, as well as, there's, we're just going to have to go through some difficult times in the world, in this country now, to get out of this. And, let's just hope that there's some education that comes out of this from the sadness and the loss of life that's going to happen. That could have been less than it's going to be.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're deeply in the experiment now in both these, with the pandemic and with the reaction to the brutality that's gone on in this country recently here. There's, we can't, ain't no turning back for the short term here, and with either of things. And we're going to have to sort of weather a storm this year with both these things. And let's just hope that we can come out of this a more civil, caring, smarter society. God help us, if we should eventually have that happen in the United States, that would sure be a nice thing. And that we had people who think about what they're doing.
Okay, now I have to ask, was that a prediction or was that a hope?
It was a hope, because you
upon what do you base that hope?
Don't base hope on anything. It's hope. It's fine.
Maybe my own stupidity, maybe, is what I base that on.
I mean, again, there are positive things happening, and people are helping each other, in some respects. I mean, people are protesting. The actual protests are for a reason, with looking toward change. People. There are things that people want to change, and I have seen a lot of good coming out of this. People helping each other, people donating masks, people, making sure that the elderly can, get food and things. I mean, that's kind of what you base that hope on, is that there are some, and hopefully many, just inherently good people, at least in this country. And we are trying to make it change.
I
mean,
think that things will get better. It'll just take fantastically longer than you hope it might have in several respects here.
I mean, I like what you're saying, and it sort of pops up all over the place. That, in fact, I was just last night listening to an interview with Robert Sapolsky, who looks at the biology of both animal and human behavior. If you're not familiar with his work, it's just fascinating stuff. But he was talking about that. How can it be that humans are capable both of such extraordinarily horrific things and at the same time capable of such extraordinarily altruistic, cooperative things? And I know in the midst of all of this, it's okay, as you say, that people helping others, everything from masks and all of that to providing other people with food to, even employers saying, okay, I'm going to find a way to make sure that the people who work for me are reasonably taken care of through all of this. If you look at what's going on right now with the protests, some of the most hopeful things that I've seen are, pictures of police officers taking a knee with the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, every time you, it's not that all police officers are bad or all police officers are brutal. That's not the case, and that's again, you need to make sure. And I think that's what maybe the media or whatever tries to make these protests about, and it's not what that is about. Because we need good police officers, and there are so many of them, and that's again hopefully what you can see, coming out of this.
But the flip side of that then is, Trump's conversation with governors today, that a recording of which slipped out, and so if anybody hasn't seen that recording, it's worth tracking down. Where he's talking about, we need to call out the military, and we need to crush, and we need to dominate these protesters, and anybody that's arrested at one of these protests, we need to put in jail for 10 years and all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, that's looking at this situation and completely ignoring the underlying reality behind the protests.
Right.
That kind of racial inequality and that kind of racial violence is a real thing, and people are that upset because they have reason to be that upset.
Well, and they've had reason to be that upset for a long time in this country and elsewhere too. And many people do have. It's hard for us to believe, because a lot of Americans are not this way, as we know. But many people do have a very strong innate sense of right and wrong. This fellow who apparently was driving a truck yesterday in the Twin Cities and apparently was just in a rush and was frustrated and was not trying to pull off some purposeful attack, but rushed ahead and nearly, thank goodness, it wasn't much worse. No one actually lost their life from this, but they pulled this truck driver out of the truck. And the people some of whom thought he was trying to run them over purposely, protected the guy from being beaten to death. Now, if that's not a test of humanity and having an innate sense of right and wrong, which does not exist in all of the political leaders right now in this nation, it does in a lot of ordinary people. And that's one thing that gives me hope for the future.
And there are many images of that. Another set of images that I saw where there was a white cop who had been separated from his squad. And there was a line of black guys that had sort of formed a cordon to say, no, we're not going to harm this guy, to protect. And the other thing too, that a lot of what is going on, there is clear evidence that it has been fomented by agitators.
That's right. Yeah.
And there is lots of evidence that there's a big white supremacist hand in that. You get white guys dressed from foot to the top of their head in black so that you can't identify them by their tats, and wearing masks, just kind of walking around. Oh, we're going to break all of the windows in front of the AutoZone. We're going to set fire to this building. We're going to start this fight. And you've got a bunch of people who are on edge. You've got a bunch of people that are upset. They're trying to protest peacefully, but it doesn't take an awful lot of a match to get things going. And once things get going, then people are in their amygdala. They're in the part of their brain, their fight or flight. They are not making anything vaguely like value-based rational choices at that point. And in the meantime, the guys that got the whole thing started, they're not going to stick around until they start passing out the cop bracelets. They're off.
Sure.
One of the things, boy, I am very hesitant right now to say anything about protesters ought to do this, that, or the other thing, because I am not living their reality. I understand that when you're on the street, it's difficult to control that. On the other hand, when you go back and you look at Martin Luther King, you look at Gandhi, something that they were adamant about. They didn't think they could just tell their people, okay, just be peaceful and that'll be it. They were adamant about preparing their protesters, to have them understand, look, you're going to go out there, be prepared to be hurt. Be prepared to be brutalized. Be prepared. And that the way that we are going to win this is by not fighting back. And in the process of not fighting back, we are going to prove that we are human and they are not. And that's what worked. But asking that of people without really preparing them for it is difficult.
It's hard because as you say, once, astronomical twilight is over, if you'll permit the term, things get dark and some incidents happen, then it's like, remember the Battle of Gettysburg, the largest battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, started by accident over Confederates going into a little town looking for shoes. But once something happens and reactions happen and there's a meeting of parties, it's totally out of control. That kind of emotional, whether it's rioting or fighting or whatever, it can't be controlled. But I think you're right. I mean, it would be nice if we could all remember the words of Dr. King in wanting to be non-violent with protesting and making the case that that's how you really win hearts and minds, and that's ultimately, that feeling ultimately will win out, and justice will prevail. The problem is, will it take, how many more decades will it take?
It won't win out unless it is made to win out. And again, the making it win out has everything to do, we've talked about this before, that the incredible importance of group membership to humans. I mean, there is nothing more important to humans than being accepted by their group to go
Absolutely
along.
Right, and that goes back hundreds of thousands of years or more. Wired into us, maybe a couple of million years, depending.
I think actually it goes back to, I think there are experiments that at least show the basis for this in chimps. I mean, this goes back a long. Any social.
But what I'm saying is, unlike a lot of the people who maybe you're not educated as much as they could be, maybe hold on to racist or selfish attitudes for whatever reasons from the past or their heritage or whatever it is. Why I think it will. Look at the generation of my son now. the young people are much more uh, forgiving as a group and inclusive as a group of everyone. And I think a lot of these bad.
How stable is that, though?
Well, I don't know, but it's hopeful. And I think a
Well, I
lot.
know it's hopeful, but how stable is it?
I think a lot of these bad attitudes that we have now in our society, I think their days are numbered because of the way the majority of 20-year-olds are in this country now, going out and protesting with their comrades, regardless of their race. And so, and I think
of course, Dave, I'm gonna push back a little bit and say that, remember, anytime I hear the Who's "Don't Get Fooled Again," I get this little pit, this sick feeling in my gut.
Sure.
Because we've been here before.
Great song and a great album, by the way.
Great song and great album, I know.
Who's next? Yeah.
Yeah, but you were talking about 1968.
Yeah.
And the hell of it is that a lot of the people today that are saying go and bash their heads were people who were out in the streets in Chicago in 1968.
Well, maybe you're right. Yeah. And maybe
so what?
It's an evolution that people that whole, you get older and you get more conservative or whatever, and you change. I don't know. But I do see a lot of hope from this generation of talking to a lot of kids who are 20 or 25 these days. It seems to be a different dynamic. Maybe there's a selection effect, and I'm not talking to kids in, I don't want to indict a particular city, but, if I were in, Macon, Georgia, maybe it would be different than Waukesha, Wisconsin. But I see a lot of hope of a lot more selflessness in the younger generation than I've ever seen in a long, long time now.
I will agree with you about seeing the hope. The question, and I agree. I mean, I really do. I see it as well. And I see it in actually a lot of it in what's going on right now. But the question is, how do you take that spark and actually turn it into something that now lasts?
The
thing, what a vote is, right? That's the point of voting.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really think we're going to be allowed to vote in November? I'm being well, I started to say I'm being facetious. I wish I were being facetious.
I want to vote by mail.
I've been doing that since I've moved to Arizona. The one I've seen in Arizona, I voted by mail the whole time.
No one was going to take that straight line and run with it, eh? Okay.
No.
But yeah, I think that's Tommy, what we're hopefully pushing toward, is that come November, because all of this will have reached a head, the idea is that we can do something about it.
Well, I agree. I absolutely agree. I mean, we politically right now,
it really can't get any worse. When you turn the lights off, go into the bunker and say, I'm not home during a national crisis like this. I mean,
and then call all the governors and tell them they're not being harsh enough on these protesters.
I'd love someone to come over and ring my doorbell tonight, and I will put a mask on and have you in for dinner if you're going to explain this away now. Okay, come on.
But
read some American history, for God's sake,
The thing that is going to happen, though, and this is now getting into how people's brains work, because in-group is so important to us.
Mm-hmm.
The only way that these things ultimately get fixed is if we begin viewing the person on the other side of these divides as in-group.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's one of the difficulties, I think, with some of the messaging is, okay, you guys just need to change the way that you think. Now, that's a true statement. But the effective statement is we both need to reach across that divide and find a way to work together.
Right.
Mhm.
I think that is probably more important because I mean, even again, a lot of the younger generation is still kind of like, well, the older generation is just crazy, or the people on the other side of the political divide from me, they're just crazy, and I don't trust them, and we'll never work together, and that isn't the right, attitude to have. It's not. That's not
It's a really big ask. If you just wait until all of your opponents die one by one to solve everything, that can be a long time. Okay.
That can be a very long time,
or a very short time in the next couple months. Who knows?
Especially when your opponents are actively going out there and trying to recruit new.
Right.
They're always out there trying to round up the next generation of little Hitler youth, and that's a real thing. And so this doesn't go away until enough people finally just take hands and say, we're not going to let this happen anymore. You see, I want to see with Trump saying, oh, we're just going to send the military into these cities and squash it and so on and so forth. I want to see cops out with the protesters when the military gets there saying, no, this is our
or the military
saying,
no, we're not going to do that. I mean,
we're not going to do that.
Again, not everyone in the military, believes that everyone else is on the wrong side either. So
in the end, don't you think that love is stronger than hate, though?
That's what you want it to be.
Yeah.
Just the hope.
Is that just a song?
That's a song.
I am not. Hate is probably easier, but that doesn't necessarily make it stronger. So
I am not a kumbaya person. The whole let's just get around and sing kumbaya and love each other and it will all be better doesn't do it, because I am really fascinated by the way that our brains work and the evolutionary psychology behind that, and that does not make sense in the context of who we are. What does make sense in the context of who we are is understanding other people to be us rather than them. And maybe that's another way of saying, love your neighbors by, maybe that's a different way of phrasing, understand that your neighbors are us. That everyone on the planet is us in that sense. But we are wired with the idea of there's an us and there's a them.
And that's another song. That's Us and Them, Pink Floyd,
True.
Which one is pink? The famous question,
Yep. Which one is pink? And I've been eating these berries for 6 or 7 weeks now. Maybe they'll keep us both alive. Which is anyway. So yeah, I mean, you look at a moment like this and it's like, okay, if the protesters and the cops who are hand in hand saying, no, this is not okay, when the cops join the protests, if you look in these neighborhoods where multicultural, I have some very good friends that are on the ground in Minneapolis, and they're seeing the people come out of these multicultural neighborhoods and come together to, okay, we're going to get out there and we're going to clean up and we're going to help board up businesses and we're going to get food into the hands of people. Things that you're not seeing is an incredible effort on the part of the community to reach out to itself across all of those kinds of divides. And so unfortunately, what you see in the media mostly is a bunch of political theater. Sure.
But there's healing going on, you're saying, as well.
But there is healing going on as well. In fact, a friend said that she was down by the Capitol in Minnesota, and okay, the National Guard are there, and you might think, oh, that's a horrible thing, except, the National Guard are there, and people are going up and talking to the National Guard, and her statement was the National Guard were saying to everybody, apologies for the inconvenience, but we need to go this way. Have a nice day. And so there's a very, very large fraction of people there on all sides who really are very much in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And they outnumber the white supremacists that are there. They outnumber those on the other side of the spectrum who, I mean, clearly there are people there who just say, hey, this is kind of fun. We get to loot and burn and all of that. Those people do exist.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast majority of people who are there, regardless of whether they're with the protesters or whether they're with the cops or whether they're white or black or Central American or, you know, whatever, there's a good multicultural neighborhood there, just want to live together, actually do just want to live in peace. And the question for me is, will they figure out a way to reach out and take each other's hands and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is just enough of this horseshit. That this isn't going to happen anymore. And the reason this isn't going to happen anymore is that none of us are going to tolerate it.
Mm-hmm.
That, look, you don't have to worry if another cop does what happened there. You don't have to worry, because by the time they get back to the precinct, they're not going to like what happens to them.
Mm.
You know, those are not us. They do not stand for what we are. But for the cops, that now means having, again, who is us and who is them.
Mm-hmm.
Here is this person that I have been taught to view as my comrade in arms, you know, brothers in arms, the whole thing. And I loathe everything that they're about, but there's no stronger force than the people that you are us with. And so our natural strongest desire as human beings is to rally around those of us who are family.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're asking for here is you're asking to move beyond this will require finding a way to make the police and people like that look at the neighborhoods and see family, to make the people in the neighborhoods look at the cops and see family. Mm-hmm. And to have none of that family tolerate the kind of horseshit that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what it's going to take. But so I don't know. Will it happen? I don't know.
Let's hope
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, but
I want to toss one last thought out there right quick, and that is that numbers are starting to climb again. A lot of people have decided that they don't need to worry about doing things to protect others, which means that it's time that we have to start worrying about the protecting ourselves as opposed to being part of the social compact to protect others. And right now, if you look around, you can actually find N95 masks. So it's time to use the window to go and actually buy yourself some real honest to goodness PPE. So I'll just toss that out there. Anyway. All right. See you guys on Thursday.
Okay.
All right.
Be safe.
Be safe, everybody. Take care.